Hi, welcome everyone. Good evening. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and welcome to the Portland Museum of Art. My name is Shalini Lagal, and I'm the Deputy Director of Curatorial Affairs here at the PMA. I would first like to acknowledge that we are convening in the Land of the Dawn, a region encompassing present-day Maine and the unceded homelands of the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, and Abenaki nations. Together, these nations represent the Wabanaki Confederacy that has stewarded these lands and waters for thousands of years before the establishment of national borders and state lines, and continue to do so today. As the PMA continues to explore models for partnering with Wabanaki communities, I would like to invite you all to join us next Saturday, May 31st, for the public symposium Reflecting Forward, Learning from American Art Reinstallations. Through panel conversations and artist perspectives, we will examine the impact of Indigenous knowledge and leadership in shaping the future of museum practice. But tonight is different. Tonight, we're here to celebrate the opening of the exhibition Painting Energy, the Alex Katz Foundation collection at the PMA. This show and the accompanying publication, little advertising here, would not have been possible without many generous supporters, including Isabel and Scott Black, the Bear Bookshop, and Rosemary, Kevin, and Hannah Rose McNeely, and the KHR McNeely Family Foundation. And the exhibition and publication represent our attempts to honor a transformative series of gifts to this museum. So I'd like to tell a little bit of a story of how we got here, everything that has happened over the last decade plus in the relationship between Alex Katz, the Alex Katz Foundation, and this museum. So in 2011, the Alex Katz Foundation undertook a meaningful journey with the PMA to expand the collection of modern and contemporary art. The very first gifts to the PMA of paintings by Charles Birchfield, Chris Martin, have continued through more recent gifts of works by Janet Fish, Marsden Hartley, and so many others. And the foundation has sought to widen the collection in both its caliber and its vision. Alex Katz's belief that Maine deserves great art is sincere, and it has inspired his lifelong investment in the artistic landscape of this region, and this investment has transformed the experience for all of you and all of the visitors to this museum. Established by one of the leading painters of our time, the collection reframes the traditional narrative of modern and contemporary art. Histories of the post-war period in American art, some of which you may have learned in classrooms like I did, those histories often tend to center abstraction or minimalism and conceptualism. But the gifts from the foundation do something different. They offer an alternative vision that centers figuration and, of course, painting, which is close to Alex Katz's own practice, but it importantly leaves space for new artists, rising artists, to enter the conversation. So the canon, the notion that this is a closed circle of modern and contemporary art is never true. In the spirit of the foundation, there are always spaces for new artists, new voices to enter this evolving tradition. And a steadfast commitment to supporting new artists' work has been this hallmark of the foundation. That commitment stems from Alex Katz's profound understanding of artistic community, solidarity, and support. So the unique mission of the Alex Katz Foundation is to support artists and support museums by gifting works of art to museums. And as we developed this project, the central question emerged of how to challenge this vision into an exhibition. How to channel this vision into an exhibition. At times, it was a challenge, and as you walk through the exhibition, you will notice that the show is a combination of a lot of different kinds of styles. You have rising artists, newer to the scene, right alongside established artists, canonical artists. You have really bright, poppy, urban types of images alongside landscape images. And then you have figuration, so human figures, right alongside abstract works of art. But what I love about that entire juxtaposition all together in one gallery is that is absolutely Alex Katz's vision for what constitutes great art. Great art is not determined by the singular style or period or subject matter. Great art is defined for Alex Katz by this indefinable quality that he describes as energy. So the title for the exhibition, Painting Energy, really emerged from that spirit. And energy is something that lets an artwork pop off the wall. So you are compelled to stop when you walk by. Well, you can't walk by because you're compelled to stop. So the variety that I've described here is immediately visible in the galleries, and I hope you go up and have a chance to look after the talk if you haven't already done so. And so I just wanted to share a couple of images and slides that really talk through that breadth. So as soon as you go into that first gallery, you'll see that we've tried to assemble a selection of landscapes, right? And landscapes can be multiple things. Landscapes can be precise, detailed, naturalistic renderings, and they can also be more abstract formulations. And so this is just a glimpse of what that could look like. You have Fairfield Porter and Charles Birchfield and their visionary studies that have this kind of striking immediacy, plays of light and color that suggest kind of really light, fleeting moments in time, and also the fluidity of the medium, right? The idea that this, that the material, the paint, the watercolor, the gouache, whatever it might be, that is transient. This is fleeting, and that somehow the texture of the paper, of the background, has to capture that and hold it, right? So Birchfield painted extensively in watercolor and gouache. There are two Birchfields in the Alex Katz Foundation collection. One of them is on view upstairs. And he developed in watercolor and gouache, again, very fleeting mediums, a dry brush technique that enabled him to work at an easel, right? So I always think about that, thinking about propping up something at an easel and using a medium like watercolor, like what confidence to approach painting from that perspective. And then on the other end of that kind of approach to landscape and naturalism, you have Lois Dodd, right there in the center, maintaining her commitment to figuration and plein air painting really throughout the course of the 20th century, even during the rise of abstract expressionism. So this work was done in Blairstown, New Jersey, where Dodd resides when not in Maine or New York. And the locale is really interesting because for Dodd, this location has really specific ridges and rock features, which he's kind of drawn to repeatedly. This is a beautiful painting, seems quite singular in the digital reproduction here, but when you see it up close, you'll notice it has these feathery marks that are really gently evoking the shapes of trees and shadows, and these thin kind of calligraphic strokes of paint that we would be familiar with here in Maine because they delineate those kinds of really subtle variations in snow. When you walk right after snowfall and you see those kinds of really beautiful light traces, you can see that in her work. And then the work on the far right here this is the first time we are showing this work. It is, again, in the Foundation collection. It is a beautiful, extraordinary watercolor by Arthur Dove, iconic leading American modernist. This is the first work by Arthur Dove to enter the PMA collection. And this work was done when Dove lived in Long Island. So Dove is a really interesting artist to bring into this conversation because he's often described as America's first abstract painter. There's some debate over who that would be, but he's often in the conversation, and he travels extensively in Europe before coming to New York to work with Stieglitz, and later, perhaps most iconically, received support from Duncan Phillips. So if you've been to the Phillips collection in Washington, D.C., they have an extraordinary collection of works by Arthur Dove that are really dating to this early patronage of Duncan Phillips to this artist. So this is a stunning, precious little work that captures Dove's approach to painting nature in ardently abstract terms. So pointed lines, irregular shapes, washes of color, undulating, evocative composition that seems both naturalistic, but also kind of going, clearly approaching the realm of abstraction. Additional works that are really in this realm, in this spirit, again, Charles Birchfield here on the left. What I love about this Birchfield work on the left is that it captures this almost kind of surrealist quality to landscape representation. And again, gouache on paper, the scale is quite extraordinary for this work, 17 by 20 inches. It does pop off the wall when you see it in the exhibition. And we have these three works here together that you see on the slide. They're juxtaposed upstairs. The Fairfield Porter in the center is astonishing because it's, for many, many reasons. Porter, there are several works by Fairfield Porter in the Alex Katz Foundation collection. Porter worked extensively in landscape, but also in figurative work. And the way his approach differed across those subjects is of great interest to Alex Katz. There's a kind of similarity in understanding there. But the other thing that's quite extraordinary about this work is that because this is watercolor, all those white areas you see are actually unpainted. Right? So when you go upstairs, you have a chance to look at it closely. You can see that it all radiates out from this center that is actually unpainted. And so the composition is kind of formed by paint around these white exposed areas. It's quite beautiful. And then below is this extraordinary work by Edward Hopper. I know I keep saying extraordinary, but they are all extraordinary, by Edward Hopper, watercolor and pencil on paper. When this work arrived at the PMA and we had our registrars and conservators looking closely at it, we almost didn't believe that someone could have such great handling of watercolor to be able to create such a detailed, tightly rendered composition. So again, these are all works that you should look closely at upstairs because the technical excellence and skill of these artists in this medium that is so difficult to control, watercolor, is so beautiful in this grouping here. And then the modernism kind of thread really continues through Alex Katz's interest in, I would say, two major artists, Marston Hartley and Stuart Davis. So the collection we're very, very fortunate to have as part of the collection 4 paintings by Marston Hartley and 2 by Stuart Davis. 3 of the Hartleys are on view in this exhibition. The other one is also on view. It's in the European galleries next to our Georges Braque. That is on view. So if you're looking for the 4th one, it's there. But American modernism is really a key strength of the collection. And in this narrative, Marston Hartley really holds a very, very specific place for Alex Katz. And I'll just pull a quote here because I think Alex speaks so clearly of about why Hartley is so important to him and to painters today. Katz states, quote, "I liked Marston Hartley's paintings early on. I liked the straight, unfussy way of painting he had. It was really open." And I think this open approach to composition, this extended all-over use of the surface and the geometric play of figures and forms, that approach really defines Hartley's painting, but also Alex Katz's. So when you see Alex Katz's work, it is using this all-over approach, the full, every corner of the canvas, the figures are playing right across the surface. And so there's a way that resonance still speaks so strongly to Katz in his own work. So to see that here as kind of resonant with his understanding of kind of a core modernist artist is just really fascinating. And then Stuart Davis, of course, leading American painter of the 20th century, integrated a number of avant-garde artistic forms. I'm thinking about cubism, collage, urban life, music. You get these bright, bold, beautiful compositions. The one on the left, After Study, is beautiful. I love Grade A on the right because it does really exemplify these modernist collage practices. And you see these different textures that kind of all come together. And then, it leaves you asking some questions. So you've got that Grade A bottle below, but then you've also got the cropped legs of a male and a female figure depicted that, just leaves you asking questions. We're looking right up at the top, which I like that. There's always that kind of little humorous energy that you see in some of these works that are really, in a lot of ways, kind of forerunners to what would come to be called pop art, right? That this is kind of really the early source of that in this moment. And I think as we move through looking at these works, and again sharing a couple of more here, two other extraordinary paintings here by Marston Hartley. Again, both of these are in the exhibition, and both of these are very rooted to Maine. So Crashing Wave Vinyl Haven, which is a seascape that, as you get up close, almost like smells like salt and has that kind of sea spray. It's so it has this tactility to it that is just quite surprising, but also as you get up close to it, the forms kind of disappear, right? And they also kind of seem to really dissolve into abstraction. And there is really something about that in Maine, particularly when you're looking at waves crashing on the rocks. Those forms come and then they go, right? They come and then they go in this kind of repeated fashion. And so it's an experience that I look at that and I find that very relatable to experiences we've had on the coast. But it's also this really kind of powerful marine representation. We can also look at that and think about someone like Winslow Homer, right? There's a way that Homer really captured the sea and coast in ways like you think about the weather beaten that's hanging right upstairs. That resonance is also there for Hartley. So the connection and the meaning for our institution to have a painting like this is quite significant. And then on the beach on the right is one of the really powerhouse paintings in the collection. This was just one of 3 works that Hartley did that summer on Old Orchard Beach, and really starting to point to some of the homoerotic themes that you would identify in Hartley's later work. So extraordinary work, amazing palette there on the top right. But again, what's really, really striking about the collection is that you'll have these powerhouses, modern powerhouses like Marston Hartley, and then these contemporary voices like Catherine Bernhardt, based in New York, doing great, strong work, very bold work in painting. This work, Red Carpet Massacre 2007, not something that I would say a curator conventionally would not put these works together, but in the mind of an artist like Alex Katz, these works work together, right? There's a narrative and a thread that goes through about the story of painting, about figuration, and about the way that the body and the viewer receives the scene that is depicted in front of us, right? So you are as aware of your presence as a beholder of this object. So those kinds of juxtapositions and narratives are what's really quite unique about this exhibition. Figuration, again, comes through quite strongly. Janet Fish is a really extraordinary artist. This is the first time we are sharing this painting at the PMA. This is a wonderful, very rich, luscious painting of Barry, who's an art critic, actually a literary critic in the early 80s. And I love this scene because he's kind of surrounded by all of these things, this material things, and yet looking off into space, doesn't really seem engaged with any of them. And Janet Fish's ability to capture really these kinds of quotidian, mundane objects of our daily life is really quite powerful. So I want to draw your attention in the digital image to both the newspaper, but also that plastic bag, that clear plastic bag, the way that that's rendered when you see it upstairs in the painting. It's really quite beautiful because it's an object that, again, I don't think any of us would find plastic bags necessarily of aesthetic power and significance, but you look at that object and you're like, oh yeah, cubist forms emanating out of this plastic bag. I see it. And then Fairfield Porter on the right, Jimmy with Lamp, which is a much more melancholic domestic interior, a really quiet, brooding scene is how I would describe that. So again, these are really resonant and strong works. In addition to these works, John Moore on the left, this is a really fun work. We've had it up before at the museum. Some of you may remember it, Frankfurt Station from 2012. We are looking here through panes of glass. And so again, the way in which our Our vision, our ability to visualize subjects is kind of made clear to us in the process of painting. That's the kind of self-consciousness that Alex Katz really wants to evoke in the viewer, and John Moore's painting does that extremely well. And the work on the right is a really special work by Jane Freilicher. We are thrilled to be able to share this with the public and as part of this collection. So Freilicher, for those of you who might not be familiar, very special artist. So she was originally from Brooklyn, associated with a large group of New York painters, including de Kooning, Katz, Fairfield Porter, but also Grace Hardigan. Grace Hardigan is going to be the subject of a major show here this fall at the PMA. And in this work, the objects really gather on the surface of the table in this fluid, soft, kind of really just everything seems quite flexible and stable, and only when you look a little more closely do you realize this seems quite unlikely, because it's flowers, fruit, cat, fish, and right, all kind of happening in the same table surface. So it's this unlikely harmony that can really only exist in the dimension of painting, but we're seeing it, and we're kind of accepting that as the reality of the still life laid out before us. The figurative work really continues in the central parts of the exhibition upstairs, and there are many strong works in this area, but I'll just highlight these two because they are, the one on the left has hung before in the museum upstairs on the third floor. Sigmar Polke, a really a titan of post-war German painting, really rose to prominence in the 1960s. He's associated principally with the capitalist realist movement, which is really pulling from American pop art, right? So this is really kind of referencing Andy Warhol, pop art, those kinds of trends. But here we're seeing a kind of reference to American modes, we might describe, because the figures represented here are three popular types, right? So a cowboy that's modeled probably after John Wayne, an armed figure, and another figure in uniform. And these references are really to Hollywood's models of masculine strength and virility done by a post-war German painter, right, on brown felt, right? So the material of this work is also extraordinary. And so there are ways in which both the kind of social, political, but also the aesthetic kind of all coalesce in powerful ways in this work. It is a work that forces you to linger and think about what you are standing in front of and witnessing. As does the one on the right, Henry Taylor. This is the first time we are sharing this work in this exhibition. So this is Untitled, Santan Dave's Mom. This is a really incredible work. First Henry Taylor to enter the PMA collection. He was the subject of a major exhibition at the Whitney last year. And this is a really special, charming work. So Santan Dave is a hip hop artist and actor from Brixton in South London. And this is his mom. And she is seated frontally with this handbag in her lap, looking right out at us. And what's really beautiful about this painting is that it really exemplifies how Taylor thinks about figuration, right? So you've got this raw emotional intensity. It seems very much an individual, not a type. But yet you're also in conversation with broader social issues. You're also in conversation with the community from which this woman emerges, right? And so those questions of identity are also there. So Taylor somehow has this uncanny ability to make things both quite individualized and also general. And the painting is like just shocking off the walls. That green is so beautiful and so almost alarming in the way that it frames her, right? So again, the confidence of putting that kind of grayish blue dress alongside this bright green background is really, that's the kind of painting energy that I think that Alex is really responding to when he sees a work like this. We've also tried to capture some of those feelings of energy as we think Alex really would identify them in a number of the abstract works of art. So there are three here that I'm showing: the Kamruza Ram on the left, the Sojourner Truth Parsons, and the Chris Martin. These are all very powerful works. They have detailed object labels, so when you go upstairs, if you want to learn more about them, you'll have a chance to to dig in. I would just like to specifically point out the work on the left. That's a very special work by Kamruz Aram. You might notice these forms that have these kinds of curvilinear, almost kind of floral references, or like almost curtailed floral references. He's referring to arches and reliefs in historic Islamic architecture. So a lot of his work was really interrogating the notion of the ornament and what happens when the ornament is the subject, right? It's not ornamental, it is actually the center, it is the subject. I hope you'll have some time to linger in the video installation. This is a 2-channel video installation, so these are just stills that we're looking at here, and I hope they're intriguing enough to leave you kind of scratching your head, by Tommy Malakoff. So Tommy Malakoff traveled across the United States for 18 months to capture footage from parking lots. And parking lots are part of our everyday life. But what's really, really incredible here is that parking lots are also sites for social gathering and spectacle, and for all kinds of gatherings that maybe they weren't originally intended for, right? And I only have to think of kind of the partying that happens before concerts and games to perhaps reference an unintended but now really beloved use of parking lots, tailgating. So this 2-channel video really offers glimpses of this dynamic, often contradictory vision of public space, right? You can only make it a space for public gathering and spectacle when there are no cars. And so you're also thinking about that as you're looking at this. I really invite everyone to spend some time in this really extraordinary installation. Again, it's the 2-channel video installation in the back of the exhibition. I just want to give you a little bit more of a couple of the highlights of the show. They're all highlights. But here, again, we've put, this is an Ansem Kiefer work, beautiful, beautiful large-scale woodcut that references the sunflower kind of emerging out of this horizontal male figure as this form of rebirth. We have that next to a work by an artist based in New York, Federico De Francesco, who's really thinking about lyrical abstraction, musical references in his abstract formulation. And then on the right is Thaddeus Mosley, who works in walnut and wooden sculpture, really developing these organic forms that are really kind of pieced together in extraordinarily technically difficult ways. So when you see that work, you think instantly about how is this put together and how is this staying together, right? What's the mechanics behind this? We also have a beautiful work by Chase Hall here on the left, and Chase Hall will actually be a speaker here at the PMA in June, so keep your eyes out for that. We're thrilled to have him here this summer. And the work on the right is by Elizabeth Hazen. This is a really stunning work that was also the cover of our catalog. I'm not sure I can think of anything better to summarize painting energy than this work here on the right, with the kind of this really center of black, but also all these colors that are looming around it. So everything seems to emanate out, but also go in to this void in a way that is abstract. But for Elizabeth, she would also describe that as referencing a figurative source for her. So the forest at 2:00 a.m. here certainly is part of this lyrical abstraction that Elizabeth does, but it also continues an exploration that she's done for many years on landscape, memory, and anticipated loss within the context of climate change. So in this work, she's reconstructing her own experiences with atmosphere, weather, geography as abstract. So the painting both registers as kind of as peaceful, as sedate, but also kind of somber and dark and maybe frightening. And again, for her, in imagining the original source of this is suggestive of distant wildfires. That was the original source. The forest at 2 a.m. is describing that condition in the forest at 2 a.m. That again leads to this representation characterization that is ambiguous, but also carries that feeling. It's still quite resonant there. There are a number of small-scale works in the exhibition, and I think for Alex Katz, small-scale works are really important. They're part of his own painting practice. All of the large-scale works that we associate with him start as really small, like 1 foot by 1 foot studies that he'll do dozens and dozens of studies of that subject before they go to that large-scale work that might be 10 by 20 feet across. And so small-scale works for Alex Katz really capture an immediacy and a feeling of kind of spontaneity that can sometimes be lost when you're going at a larger scale. And all of these artists here really evoke that, but of course I'll call attention to the one on the bottom left. This is a really beautiful and special work that Marlene Dumas, who's a globally renowned artist, makes in honor and recognition of Alex. And she also writes in the catalog, so she is in the book as well, and she speaks quite beautifully about Alex's support for artists generally, and all the many ways that he has demonstrated and generated and shown that support for artists over 70 years of his career. There are several photographs in the exhibition that also help start conversations about urban themes and imagery. And again, the juxtaposition of the urban with the landscape, with the natural rural, is a really important theme for this show that also explains Alex's rootedness in New York, yet his commitment to returning to Maine every year for over 50 years at this point, coming to spend extended periods of time in Maine that are crucial to his artistic practice. And so that dichotomy is also visible in the exhibition, and it's quite powerful. So these are works by Rudy Burkhardt, again, working in mid-20th century on these urban subjects. And then we've put other contemporary artists that are in conversation with those themes, either by looking at the grid or contemporary cityscapes. And then again, alongside other artists that further our understanding of this theme, Rackstraw Downs, beautiful work here in this kind of long horizontal expanse. This is a really striking panorama. When you see it, you both get up close, walk back, get up close, walk back. It kind of compels that movement. And the two works below are again major pieces, anchors of this collection. The Robert Rauschenberg is a powerful work of art that is from Rauschenberg's early Egyptian series. So although this is made of cardboard, concrete, metallic forms, it's actually in reference to Egyptian forms. And he's thinking about Egyptian art, and particularly the pyramid, when he works on these series. And when you go upstairs and you have a chance to look at it, I would love for you to just take a minute to look at that orange reflective paint, because that's the little hidden surprise that's quite special at the back of that work. It looks artificially lit, but it's not. It's the orange paint that's on the back that's juxtaposing off of the wall. So again, Rauschenberg's ability to think about those three-dimensional works and the ways that they would be installed, and to really kind of predetermine that in how he's pulling the works together. And then, of course, the Philip Guston on the bottom right, again, is such an important piece. This is a late Philip Guston here, done just in the final years of his life, and perhaps one of the most well-known painters of the 20th century, worked broadly in social and political themes, but towards the end of his career started doing more of these landscape or seascape subjects. You'll see that it's hard to determine actually what is the surface that we're looking at. This is representational, but it's a representational form also leads to questions about abstraction, right? And so kind of really living in that space in painting, but also all visual forms of art is what this collection is about, right? Asking you to question those previously determined and assumed categories of landscape, urban, representation, figuration, naturalism. And a couple of other images here just to round out the exhibition. You'll see these upstairs in the show. I would be remiss if I didn't take a minute. I know I've already plugged it a few times, but I just want to share that we do have a really extraordinary catalog for this exhibition, and it is there are voices from artists and scholars all throughout, but Alex also has written for this exhibition, and so I would love to just end with a few lines from Alex Katz from his contribution to the publication. Quote, "The arts today do not fully represent the large energy of the country. Part of that may have to do with access to the arts. Although we have freedom, it's a difficult path. Peter Cooper said that education should be as free as air and water. I believe that art should be available to all people." Thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoy the exhibition upstairs.